They say the most painful betrayals come from those we love the most. I never truly understood that until I found myself staring at legal documents that would have stripped me of everything. Documents my own children had urged me to sign without reading. "It's just a formality, Mom," they'd said with practiced smiles. "Trust us." Trust. Such a dangerous word when it comes wrapped in deceit. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. I'm 73 years old. And until recently, I believed my children, my flesh and blood, saw me as the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise them, not as an inconvenient obstacle to their inheritance. I was wrong. What they didn't realize was that this old woman still had a few tricks up her sleeve. They never expected me to read those papers line by line in the dead of night. Glasses perched on my nose, heart pounding with each devastating revelation. They certainly never expected me to add my own handwritten clause. A small addition with enormous consequences. A clause they never bothered to check because they assumed I was too trusting, too confused, or perhaps too afraid to question them. That single paragraph I wrote in the margins of their carefully crafted trap would change everything between us forever. It would reveal who they truly were, and more importantly, remind them who I truly am. This is the story of how I discovered my children's betrayal, how I outsmarted them at their own game, and how I reclaimed not just my home, but my dignity. Because sometimes the quietest rebellion becomes the loudest statement. Sometimes the pen truly is mightier than the sword, especially when wielded by a mother who refuses to be silenced. I've lived in this house on Maple Street for 47 years. I know every creaking floorboard, every stubborn window that needs just the right touch to open, every shadow cast by the afternoon sun through the kitchen blinds. My late husband James and I bought it when it was little more than a fixer-upper with potential. We raised our children here. Nathan, the eldest, always so serious and calculated, and Rebecca, my youngest, with her quick laugh and quicker temper. The walls have absorbed decades of Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, heated arguments, and quiet reconciliations. After James passed away 5 years ago, the children started looking at me differently. Their gazes lingered a moment too long when I searched for my reading glasses, or when I mentioned a neighbor's name I couldn't immediately recall. Small moments of forgetfulness that everyone experiences became, in their eyes, evidence of my supposed decline. "Mom, did you take your medication today?" Nathan would ask, though I'd never missed a dose. "Mom, maybe you should write down your appointments," Rebecca would suggest, despite my calendar being meticulously maintained. I recognized the pattern but dismissed it as overprotective concern. After all, they were my children, the same babies I had nursed through fevers, the teenagers whose hearts I'd helped mend after first heartbreaks, the adults whose careers I'd celebrated with tearful pride. Surely they had my best interests at heart. The fall happened on a Tuesday morning in March. Nothing dramatic, a momentary loss of balance in the bathroom that resulted in a bruised arm and wounded pride. I didn't even call them about it. Mrs. Peterson from next door had stopped by with her famous blueberry muffins and noticed the bruise. By evening, both Nathan and Rebecca were at my doorstep, faces etched with what I mistook for genuine concern. "Mom, this is exactly what we've been worried about," Nathan said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he'd perfected in his 20 years as a financial advisor. "You could have broken a hip. You could have been lying there for hours." "I'm fine," I insisted, embarrassed by the fuss. "It was just a small slip." Rebecca, always the more emotional one, had tears in her eyes. "Mom, we can't lose you too, not after Dad." Their concern seemed so real, so heartfelt, that I felt guilty for dismissing it. I agreed to be more careful, to consider a medical alert bracelet, to text them each morning to confirm I was all right. Small concessions to ease their minds. What I didn't realize then was that the fall wasn't just an accident to them. It was an opportunity. The visits increased after that. Nathan would drop by unannounced, inspecting my refrigerator, checking my medication organizer, asking pointed questions about my finances. Rebecca called twice daily, her questions becoming increasingly invasive. Had I paid my property taxes? Was my will updated? Had I considered what would happen to the house eventually? I noticed other changes too. They began speaking about me in the third person when we were all together, as if I weren't present. Mom doesn't need to worry about that, Nathan would tell Rebecca. She probably doesn't remember, Rebecca would respond. I'd clear my throat and remind them, she is sitting right here and has all her faculties intact. Thank you very much. They'd exchange those looks, the ones that said, poor Mom, she doesn't realize. But I did realize. I realized more than they knew. I saw how Nathan's eyes lingered on the antique grandfather clock that had been in James's family for generations. I noticed how Rebecca casually mentioned her son's college fund whenever the conversation turned to finances. I observed how they both seemed to be mentally cataloging my possessions, dividing the spoils before I was even gone. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. These were my children, the same ones whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose nightmares I had soothed, whose triumphs I had celebrated, as if they were my own. Surely I was misreading their intentions. Then came the day they arrived together, an unusual occurrence, since they typically coordinated their visits to ensure I was checked on daily. Nathan carried a leather portfolio, Rebecca a forced smile. They sat me down at the kitchen table where they'd once done homework and eaten countless family dinners. Mom, Nathan began, his voice smooth as silk. Rebecca and I have been talking, and we think it's time to get your affairs in order. Affairs in order, such a clinical phrase for what they were proposing. Nathan opened his portfolio and spread several official-looking documents across my kitchen table. The same table where I'd once helped him with his algebra homework, where Rebecca had announced her first pregnancy, where James and I had shared our final anniversary dinner before his diagnosis. These are just some standard documents, Nathan explained, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he reserved for what he considered difficult clients. Power of attorney, healthcare directives, property transfer forms, just precautionary measures. Rebecca nodded enthusiastically. It's for peace of mind, Mom. For all of us. I reached for the papers, but Nathan subtly shifted them, pointing instead to signature lines highlighted in bright yellow. You don't need to worry about all the legal jargon, Mom. That's why we're here, to handle the complicated stuff. I'd still like to read them, I said, extending my hand more firmly this time. The siblings exchanged a glance I'd seen countless times throughout their childhood. The silent communication that usually preceded a coordinated effort to get their way. Of course you can read them, Rebecca said quickly. But they're really dense, full of legal terminology that even we had trouble understanding. The lawyer explained everything to us. What lawyer? I asked, feeling the first real stirring of suspicion. Just a family law specialist Nathan knows through work, Rebecca answered too casually. He gave us a great rate since we're handling everything at once. Nathan checked his watch, an expensive timepiece James had given him for his 30th birthday. Mom, I hate to rush you, but I have a client meeting in 2 hours and the notary is only available until noon. Notary, the word hung in the air between us, just to make everything official, he explained smoothly. She's waiting in her car. I told her we wouldn't take long. The pressure was subtle but unmistakable. My children, who normally couldn't coordinate a holiday dinner without weeks of planning, had orchestrated this ambush with military precision. They had a notary waiting outside. They had multiple documents prepared. They had rehearsed explanations for any questions I might ask. I think I'd like to have my own lawyer look these over, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Rebecca's smile faltered. Mom, that would be an unnecessary expense. We've already paid for everything. It's standard procedure," Nathan added. "Nothing that requires a second opinion." "Then you won't mind if I take my time reading them," I replied, pulling the stack of papers toward me. Nathan's jaw tightened, a tell he'd had since childhood when things weren't going his way. "Mom, we're trying to help you. This isn't the time to be difficult." Difficult? The word stung. I'd heard it before, when I'd questioned a medication change, when I'd declined Rebecca's offer to help organize my jewelry box, when I'd refused to discuss selling James's beloved classic car that still sat in the garage. "I'm not being difficult," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'm being prudent." Rebecca reached across the table and took my hand. Her nails were perfectly manicured, painted a soft pink that matched her blouse. "Mom, don't you trust us? After everything we've done for you since Dad died?" The guilt trip. Another familiar tactic, as if checking on their widowed mother was an extraordinary act of charity rather than basic human decency. "It's not about trust," I said, though of course it was exactly about trust. "It's about understanding what I'm signing." Nathan sighed dramatically. "Fine. We'll leave the papers here. Look them over if you must, but we need them signed by tomorrow. The lawyer is filing everything on Friday, the artificial deadline." Another red flag I should have recognized immediately. "I'll read them tonight," I promised, not missing the look of frustration that passed between them. They left shortly after, making a show of hugging me tightly at the door, as if to remind me of their love, their concern, their good intentions. As soon as their cars pulled away, I gathered the documents and retreated to James's old study, where his reading glasses still sat on the desk, where his presence still lingered in the worn leather of his chair. I spent hours there, poring over page after page of legal terminology, my dictionary at my side, making notes in the margins. By midnight, my eyes were burning, but my mind was clear. Hidden among benign healthcare directives and reasonable power of attorney provisions was the truth. A property transfer agreement that would sign over my home, our home, to Nathan and Rebecca, effective immediately, with a life estate provision that would allow me to continue living there only at their discretion. I would become, essentially, a guest in my own home. A guest who could be asked to leave whenever they deemed it necessary for my well-being. The house was utterly silent as the grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight. The same clock that had marked every significant moment of our family life now seemed to be counting down to something ominous. 12 solemn chimes that echoed through the empty rooms, each one striking against my heart like an accusation. I sat at James's desk, surrounded by the documents my children had so casually asked me to sign, my reading glasses perched on my nose, a notepad filled with my increasingly alarmed observations, and a cup of tea long gone cold beside me. The desk lamp cast a small circle of light in the darkness, illuminating the truth I had uncovered paragraph by painful paragraph. "Section 7, Clause B," I read aloud to the empty room, my voice barely above a whisper. "The grantees shall have full authority to determine appropriate living arrangements for the grantor, should they deem the current residence unsuitable for the grantor's continued well-being and safety." In plain English, Nathan and Rebecca could decide at any time that I was no longer capable of living in my own home and move me wherever they pleased, likely rotating between their homes as Rebecca had later suggested, or worse, into some facility where I would be out of sight and out of mind. I removed my glasses and pressed my fingers against my closed eyelids, trying to stem the tears that threatened to fall. Not tears of sadness, but of anger, a white-hot fury I hadn't felt since James's doctor had suggested we prepare for the inevitable, months before we were ready to give up hope. How could they? I whispered to James's empty chair, half expecting his reassuring voice to answer me, as it had so many times during our 48 years of marriage. "Our children, James, our babies." But I knew the answer. I'd seen the signs for months, perhaps years. The way Nathan's eyes lingered on the property assessment notice that had arrived last spring, showing the substantial increase in our home's value as the neighborhood had gentrified. The casual way Rebecca had mentioned how her friend's mother had downsized to a senior apartment, and how liberating it had been for everyone. The increasing frequency of their comments about the maintenance the house required, the stairs that might become problematic, the yard that was too much work for someone my age. They wanted the house, or more accurately, they wanted the money the house represented. The 4-bedroom colonial on a quarter-acre lot in a now desirable neighborhood that James and I had purchased for $42,000 in 1976 was now worth nearly $1 million. A tempting inheritance indeed, especially with Nathan's oldest starting college next year and Rebecca's recent divorce straining her finances. I stood up, my joints protesting after hours of sitting hunched over the desk, and walked to the window. The street was quiet, the neighbors' houses dark except for the occasional porch light. Mrs. Peterson's house across the street, where her late husband had installed solar-powered garden lights that still illuminated her flower beds each night. The Abernathy's place next door, where 3 generations now lived together after their son's family had moved in to help care for them in their 80s. This was more than just a house. It was my anchor in a world that had already taken so much from me. It was where I still felt James's presence in every room. It was independence. It was dignity. I returned to the desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. Yellow, like the ones James used to bring home from his law office. Though he'd been a corporate attorney, not a family law specialist, he'd taught me enough over the years about contracts and fine print. "Always read everything twice, Ellie," he'd say. "The devil's in the details." Tonight I'd found the devil in my children's documents. Now I needed to find my own salvation. I began drafting in my neatest handwriting, channeling James's precise legal phrasing that I'd absorbed over decades of proofreading his briefs. A simple clause, just a paragraph long, but powerful enough to protect me. I worked methodically, revising and refining until the words were perfect, clear, unambiguous, and legally sound. When I finished, I read it aloud one final time. "Notwithstanding any provision herein to the contrary, any decision regarding the sale, transfer, modification, or change in occupancy status of the property located at 1847 Maple Street shall require the express written consent of Eleanor Mitchell. Grantor, this consent must be provided in the form of a notarized document, signed in the presence of an independent legal representative of grantor's choosing. Any attempt to circumvent this provision shall render the entirety of this agreement null and void." It wasn't poetry, but it was protection. A legal shield crafted by a woman they had underestimated, a woman they had assumed would sign whatever was put in front of her, without question. I carefully transcribed my clause onto the original document, placing it strategically at the bottom of page 4, just before the signature page, writing in small but perfectly legible script that blended seamlessly with the printed text. To the casual observer, to my hurried, overconfident children, it would look like just another paragraph in a document full of legal jargon. As I finally climbed the stairs to my bedroom, dawn was breaking. I felt exhausted but strangely peaceful. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, perhaps even the painful shattering of illusions I still harbored about my children's character. But tonight, I had reclaimed something essential: the power to protect myself, to stand up for my dignity, to refuse to be managed like an inconvenient asset. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, dreaming of James. In my dream, he sat across from me at our kitchen table, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled that proud smile I knew so well. "That's my Ellie," he said. "You always were the smartest one in the room." Nathan and Rebecca arrived precisely at 10 the next morning, as punctual for this as they rarely were for family gatherings. Nathan wore his power suit, charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, his closing the deal attire. Rebecca had dressed more casually, but had applied her makeup with careful precision, her smile fixed and bright as she entered my kitchen. "Good morning, Mom," Nathan said, setting his leather portfolio on the table. "Did you have a chance to look over everything?" I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "I did. Very thoroughly." A flicker of unease crossed his face, quickly masked. "Great. Did you have any questions?" "Several, actually," I replied, watching as they exchanged glances. "But I've resolved them on my own," Rebecca laughed nervously. "Mom, you should have called if you were confused about anything. That's why we're here, to help explain the complicated parts." I smiled thinly. "Nothing was too complicated for me to understand, dear." Nathan cleared his throat, clearly eager to move things along. "Well, if you're satisfied, we should get these signed. The notary is waiting in her car again. By all means, invite her in," I said, gesturing to the door. I wouldn't want to keep her waiting in this heat. While Rebecca went to fetch the notary, a young woman named Melissa, with a professional demeanor and a notary stamp in her purse, Nathan arranged the documents on the table, flipping efficiently to each yellow highlighted signature line. "We'll start with the healthcare directive," he said, uncapping an expensive pen and holding it out to me. "Then the power of attorney, and finally the property agreement." I took the pen, its weight substantial in my hand. "Actually, I'd like to start with the property agreement." Nathan's smile faltered. "It makes more sense to go in order, Mom." "I insist," I said firmly, reaching for the document in question. Reluctantly, he slid it toward me. I flipped deliberately through each page, making a show of reviewing it one final time, though I had already memorized every damning clause. When I reached page 4, I paused briefly, my eyes finding my handwritten edition nestled among the dense paragraphs. It was nearly invisible unless you were looking for it, which they clearly weren't. The notary stood ready, her expression professionally blank. Rebecca hovered nearby, her fingers nervously twisting the bracelet I'd given her for her 30th birthday. "Everything looks in order," I said finally, picking up the pen. I signed my name with a flourish, Eleanor Grace Mitchell, the same signature that had appeared on their birth certificates, school permission slips, and college tuition checks, the same hand that had signed countless birthday cards with "Love always, Mom," the same signature that was now protecting me from their betrayal. Nathan visibly relaxed as I moved through the remaining documents, signing each one methodically. When the last signature was complete, the notary applied her stamp and added her own signature as witness. "There," Nathan said, gathering the papers with poorly concealed eagerness. "That wasn't so bad, was it? Now everything's protected and taken care of." "Yes," I agreed, meeting his eyes steadily. "Everything is protected." Rebecca hugged me, her expensive perfume enveloping me in a cloud of false sweetness. "We're so proud of you, Mom, for taking this step. It's really for the best." I returned her hug stiffly. "I'm sure we'll all get exactly what we deserve from this arrangement." They left shortly after, Nathan tucking the documents securely into his portfolio, both of them promising to call me later. The notary thanked me politely and followed them out. I stood in my doorway, watching as they drove away, wondering how long it would take them to discover what I had done. If they ever would. I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted by the performance. The house felt different somehow. Both a fortress I had successfully defended, and a home that had been tainted by deceit. I made my way to the living room and sank into James's old recliner, running my hands over the worn armrests where his hands had rested for so many years. "Well, James," I said to the empty room, "I've bought myself some time, but I'm afraid this battle is just beginning." I was right. The calm would last exactly 16 days before the storm broke over my head, before my children discovered that their carefully laid plans had been disrupted by a mother who refused to go quietly into that good night. For 2 weeks, life returned to a strange semblance of normalcy. Nathan called every other day, his voice carefully modulated to sound concerned rather than controlling. Rebecca dropped by with groceries I hadn't asked for, chattering about her children's activities while her eyes scanned my home, as if mentally measuring for new curtains. I played along, thanking them for their attention, accepting their help with a smile that never quite reached my eyes. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for them to discover my small act of rebellion hidden in plain sight among the legal jargon they'd never expected me to read, let alone understand. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the garden tending to the rose bushes James and I had planted on our 25th anniversary, each one named after a place we'd visited together. The Chicago Peace, the Paris Delight, the Rome Splendor. My hands were deep in the soil when my phone rang. Nathan's name flashed on the screen. "Hello, dear," I answered, keeping my voice light. The silence on the other end lasted just a beat too long. Then, "Mom, we need to talk. Rebecca and I are coming over. Now." No preamble, no pleasantries, just cold, barely contained fury. "I'll put on some coffee," I replied calmly, though my heart had begun to race. They arrived together again, this time without the pretense of casual visits or helpful children checking on their aging mother. Nathan's face was flushed with anger. Rebecca's eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying, or more likely, raging. I met them at the door, composed in a floral dress I'd worn to church just days before, my white hair neatly styled, lipstick freshly applied. I would not meet this confrontation looking like the feeble old woman they believed me to be. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "The coffee's ready?" "We're not here for coffee, Mom," Nathan snapped, striding past me into the living room, a folder clutched in his white-knuckled grip. Rebecca followed, avoiding my eyes. I closed the door and took a deep breath before joining them. Nathan stood by the fireplace, too agitated to sit, while Rebecca perched on the edge of the sofa, her posture rigid with tension. "What seems to be the problem?" I asked, though I knew perfectly well. Nathan slapped the folder down on the coffee table. "This is the problem, Mom. This thing you added to the property agreement without telling us." I sat in my armchair, folding my hands in my lap. "I didn't add anything without telling you. I simply read what I was signing and made a necessary amendment before I signed it." "Necessary?" he sputtered. "You completely undermined the entire purpose of the document." "And what purpose was that, Nathan?" I asked quietly. "To take control of my home while I'm still very much alive and capable of managing my own affairs?" Rebecca finally spoke, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine hurt. "We were trying to protect you, Mom, to make sure everything was taken care of. By making me a guest in my own home, by giving yourselves the power to move me wherever you pleased, whenever it became convenient for you." Nathan paced, running a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture so like his father's that it momentarily softened my resolve. "That's not fair. We were thinking about your safety, your future." "My future?" I repeated. "And did it occur to either of you to discuss my future with me? To ask what I wanted rather than deciding for me?" "We tried," Rebecca protested. "Every time we brought up the subject of downsizing or assisted living, you shut down the conversation, because those aren't options I'm interested in considering at this point in my life," I replied firmly. "This is my home. I'm managing perfectly well here." "You fell," Nathan reminded me accusingly. "You could have been seriously hurt." "People of all ages fall, Nathan. Your son broke his arm falling off his skateboard last year. Should we have taken away his independence too?" He flushed darker. "That's completely different, is it? Or is it different because you see him as a person with agency and me as a problem to be managed?" Rebecca leaned forward. "Mom, be reasonable. This house is too big for you. The maintenance alone is my concern, not yours." I interrupted. "I have the financial resources to maintain my home, as you both well know." Nathan stopped pacing and fixed me with a hard stare. The lawyer says your addition to the document might not even be legally binding. It wasn't part of the original agreement we all discussed. I met his gaze steadily. We never discussed the original agreement, Nathan. You presented it to me as a fait accompli and expected me to sign without reading it. As for its legality, I'm quite confident it would stand up to scrutiny. Your father taught me well. Dad would be ashamed of how you're treating us, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. After everything we've done for you. The accusation stung, as she knew it would. I took a moment to compose myself before responding. Your father would be heartbroken to see his children attempting to manipulate their mother this way, I said quietly. He raised you to be better than this. Nathan slammed his hand down on the mantelpiece. This isn't manipulation. This is practical planning for an inevitable future, a future you decided upon without my input. I reminded him. A future where I would have no say in where I live or how I spend my final years. We would have taken care of you, Rebecca insisted, tears now flowing freely. You would have been comfortable but powerless, I said. A ward rather than a mother. An obligation rather than a person. Nathan gathered the documents, shoving them back into the folder. This isn't over, Mom. We're going to speak with another lawyer. You're welcome to do that, I said calmly. In the meantime, I've made an appointment with my own attorney to review all the documents I signed and ensure my interests are properly protected. Rebecca looked up sharply. Your own attorney? Since when do you have your own attorney? Since I realized I needed one, I replied simply. Margaret Winters. She was in your father's firm. She's specialized in elder law since retiring from corporate practice. Nathan's expression shifted from anger to something closer to respect, though he quickly masked it. Fine, have it your way for now. But this conversation isn't finished. They left shortly after, Nathan barely mumbling a goodbye, Rebecca giving me a stiff, perfunctory hug at the door. As their cars pulled away, I felt a curious mixture of sadness and triumph. I had won this battle, but at what cost to our relationship? Had I merely delayed the inevitable, or had I fundamentally changed the dynamic between us? I returned to my garden, finding solace in the familiar task of nurturing life from the earth. As I worked, I noticed movement across the street. Mrs. Peterson was watching from her porch, concern evident even at a distance. I waved to reassure her, and she crossed the street with the spryness of someone 20 years younger than her. 82 years. Everything all right, Eleanor? She asked, eyeing the tire marks Nathan's hasty departure had left on my driveway. Those kids of yours seemed upset. I smiled wryly. Just a difference of opinion about my living arrangements, Martha. She nodded knowingly. It's time to consider your options conversation. Had that one with my son last Christmas, and how did you handle it? Martha's eyes twinkled. Told him I'd consider his options when he considered mine, which included him minding his own business, until I couldn't mind mine. We shared a laugh, and for the first time since discovering my children's betrayal, I felt the knot in my chest begin to loosen. I wasn't alone in this struggle. There were others like me, older but not diminished, experienced but not expired, in need of respect rather than management. Would you like to stay for coffee? I asked impulsively. I made a pot that no one drank. I'd like that very much, Martha replied. And while we drink it, you can tell me exactly what you did to put that look on Nathan's face. I haven't seen anyone that shade of purple since my herald found out what a new transmission costs. As we sat on my porch, sharing coffee and confidences in the gentle afternoon sun, I realized something important. Family isn't just about blood relations. Sometimes it's about who sees you clearly, who respects your autonomy, who values your wisdom rather than viewing your age as a liability. Martha understood what Nathan and Rebecca had forgotten. That growing older doesn't mean surrendering your voice, your choices, or your dignity. And in that understanding, she gave me something my own children had recently failed to provide. the simple gift of being treated as a whole person, complete and competent in myself. 3 days after the confrontation with Nathan and Rebecca, I was sorting through old photographs in the living room when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my granddaughter, Olivia, Nathan's 19-year-old daughter, home from her freshman year at college. Her expression was hesitant, almost nervous, so unlike her usual confident demeanor. I opened the door, genuinely pleased to see her. "Olivia!" What a lovely surprise. She shifted awkwardly on the porch, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. A gesture that reminded me painfully of Nathan at her age, before ambition had hardened his edges. "Hi, Grandma. Can I come in?" "Dad doesn't know I'm here." Those last words hung between us, laden with meaning. I stepped aside to let her enter, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted around as if expecting to find evidence of the frail, incompetent woman her father had apparently described to her. "Would you like some lemonade?" I offered. "I made it fresh this morning." She nodded, following me to the kitchen. The heart of this home, where she had perched on countertops licking cookie batter from spoons, where she had tearfully confided her first heartbreak at 16, where I had taught her to make James's favorite apple pie just last Thanksgiving. I poured 2 glasses and sat across from her at the table. She took a sip, then set the glass down with deliberate care. "Grandma, what's going on with you and Dad? And Aunt Rebecca? They're both acting weird, having these intense conversations that stop whenever I walk into the room." I considered my response carefully. Olivia was young, but she wasn't a child. She deserved honesty, not a sanitized version of family discord. "Your father and aunt asked me to sign some legal documents recently," I explained. "Documents that would have given them control over my home, and by extension, my living arrangements. I signed them, but not before adding a clause that protected my right to make my own decisions about where and how I live." Olivia's eyes widened. "They tried to take your house?" "Not exactly," I clarified, though her interpretation wasn't entirely wrong. "They framed it as protection, ensuring I would be taken care of as I age. But the practical effect would have been to give them complete authority over my most significant asset and my living situation." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then, "And they didn't tell you that's what the papers meant?" "They encouraged me not to read them too carefully," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "They presented it as routine paperwork that was too complicated for me to understand." Olivia's expression darkened. That's awful, Grandma. And totally not okay." Her indignation warmed me, though I tried not to show it. I didn't want to drive a wedge between her and her father, despite everything. "Your father believes he's acting in my best interest," I said, more generously than I felt. "He's concerned about my safety living alone." Olivia shook her head firmly. "No, that's not it. Or at least, not all of it." She hesitated, then continued in a rush. "I overheard Dad talking to Mom last night. He was really angry, saying something about how your stunt might cost them hundreds of thousands in potential equity, and how they'd have to find another way to secure the asset before you did something reckless with it." The words hit me like physical blows. Secure the asset. As if my home, the repository of my memories, my independence, my life with James, was nothing more than a line item on a balance sheet. As if I were nothing more than a temporary obstacle to their inheritance. I must have paled, because Olivia reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I shouldn't have told you like that. But I thought you should know what they're really saying." I squeezed her hand, grateful for her honesty. "No, you were right to tell me. Knowledge is power, especially when others are trying to keep it from you." Olivia nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. "Dad's always been obsessed with financial planning. He maps out everything. My college fund, Mom's retirement, their investment portfolio. But lately, It's like he sees everything as numbers on a spreadsheet, not as, people with feelings. And your Aunt Rebecca? I asked, curious about my daughter's role in all this. Olivia rolled her eyes. Aunt Rebecca follows whatever Dad says when it comes to money, especially since the divorce. She's scared of ending up broke. The pieces were falling into place. Nathan, the financial planner, always calculating, always looking ahead to the next opportunity. Rebecca, financially vulnerable after her ex-husband's betrayal, looking for security wherever she could find it. My home, with its appreciated value in a now desirable neighborhood, represented a solution to both their concerns. I want you to know something, Olivia, I said, meeting her gaze directly. I have no intention of being reckless with my home or my finances. Your grandfather and I planned carefully for our retirement. I have savings, investments, and insurance policies. The house is paid off. I'm not in any financial distress. I know that, Grandma, she said quickly. Anyone who spends 5 minutes talking to you knows you're totally on top of things. Her faith in me brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you for that. It means more than you know. Olivia bit her lip, hesitating before asking her next question. What are you going to do now? About Dad and Aunt Rebecca, I mean. I sighed, looking around the kitchen where so much of our family life had unfolded. I'm going to protect myself and my independence. I've already spoken with an attorney who specializes in elder law. She's reviewing all the documents I signed and helping me create a proper estate plan, one that reflects my wishes, not someone else's agenda. Good, Olivia said firmly. You should be the one deciding things, not Dad. That said, I continued carefully, I do understand their concerns about me living alone. I'm not opposed to making some reasonable accommodations as I get older. Installing grab bars in the bathroom. Perhaps a medical alert system. What I object to is being treated as incapable of participating in these decisions. Olivia nodded thoughtfully. That makes total sense. It's like they jumped straight from Grandma might need some help eventually to let's take over everything now while she doesn't notice. Her perceptiveness impressed me. That's exactly it. She twisted her glass, leaving condensation rings on the table. Something that would have irritated Nathan to no end, but that I found endearingly familiar. Grandma, can I help somehow? I don't know anything about legal stuff, but maybe I could, be your backup? Someone who checks in but doesn't try to control everything? The offer touched me deeply. Here was my granddaughter, barely an adult herself, offering the very thing my own children had failed to provide. Respect for my autonomy, coupled with genuine concern. I would appreciate that very much, I told her. Sometimes all I need is someone to talk things through with. Someone who sees me as a person, not a problem. Olivia smiled, relief evident in her expression. I can definitely do that. And maybe I could help you set up some tech stuff. We could get you one of those video doorbell things so you can see who's at the door before opening it. And maybe set up automatic bill payments for your utilities so Dad can't claim you're forgetting to pay bills or whatever. I laughed. That's actually quite brilliant. Your father couldn't argue with practical solutions that address his stated concerns. We spent the next hour brainstorming reasonable accommodations that would enhance my safety and independence without surrendering control. Olivia took notes on her phone, her enthusiasm growing with each idea. By the time she left, we had a practical plan that acknowledged the reality of aging while preserving my dignity and autonomy. At the door, she hugged me tightly. I'm sorry about Dad and Aunt Rebecca, she whispered. They're wrong about this. They're afraid, I said, trying to be fair despite my hurt. Fear makes people do things they might otherwise never consider. Still not okay, she insisted. I'll come back tomorrow to help with that video doorbell. And Grandma, don't let them bully you. You're the strongest person I know. As I watched her drive away, I felt a curious lightening of my spirit. The betrayal of my children still stung. Perhaps it always would. But Olivia's support reminded me that family connections could still be sources of strength rather than manipulation. She saw me clearly, not as a declining elder to be managed, but as a whole person, deserving of respect. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since discovering the deception. I had always kept a journal, a habit James had teased me about, but ultimately respected. "Your private thoughts deserve a private place," he'd said once, and he had never once asked to read what I wrote. "Today," I wrote, "I found an ally in the most unexpected place, the next generation. While my children see me as a problem to solve, my granddaughter sees me as a person to support. There's a lesson here about assumptions and respect that I'm still processing. Perhaps wisdom doesn't always flow downward through generations. Sometimes it rises up from the young to remind the middle-aged of what they've forgotten. That dignity isn't something that expires with age." The following Tuesday, I received a text message from Nathan that was as terse as it was ominous. "Mom, Rebecca and I are coming by at 2 p.m. with Daniel Hargrove. He's an attorney. Please be available." No request, just a command. No explanation, just an expectation of compliance. I felt a flutter of anxiety but quashed it immediately. I was done being intimidated in my own home. I replied simply, "I'll be here with Margaret Winters, my attorney." His response came quickly. "That won't be necessary." Mine was quicker. It wasn't a question. I called Margaret immediately. She had been James's colleague for 20 years before specializing in elder law. A petite woman with steel-gray hair and an even steelier resolve when it came to protecting her clients' interests. "Bring the bully squad, will they?" she said when I explained the situation. "Don't worry, Eleanor. I'll be there at 1:45, and I'll bring copies of everything we've prepared." True to her word, Margaret arrived 15 minutes before Nathan and Rebecca were due, her briefcase bulging with documents, her expression serene but determined. We sat in the living room, reviewing our strategy, when the doorbell rang. Not the traditional chime, but the distinctive notification from the video doorbell Olivia had installed just days before. I checked my phone, seeing Nathan's impatient face on the screen, Rebecca slightly behind him, and a third person, presumably Daniel Hargrove, standing at a carefully professional distance. "Ready?" Margaret asked. I nodded, squaring my shoulders. "Ready." I opened the door with a pleasant smile. "Hello, Nathan, Rebecca. Please come in." Their expressions shifted from determination to surprise when they spotted Margaret rising from the sofa. Nathan recovered quickly, his face hardening. "Mom, I told you this was a family matter. You didn't need to involve outside parties. And yet you brought your own attorney," I pointed out mildly, gesturing to the distinguished-looking man in the expensive suit. "It seemed prudent to have equal representation." Rebecca stepped forward, attempting to smooth over the awkwardness. "We just want to talk, Mom, to find a solution that works for everyone." "I'm all for solutions," I replied, gesturing them toward the seating area. "Please, sit down. Would anyone like coffee or tea?" The formality of the offer seemed to unsettle them further. This wasn't proceeding according to their script. The concerned children coming to reason with their difficult, confused mother. Instead, they found themselves in what felt distinctly like a business negotiation. Once everyone was seated, Nathan and Rebecca on the sofa, their attorney in the armchair, Margaret and I in chairs we'd positioned side by side. Nathan cleared his throat. "Mom, we've consulted with Mr. Hargrove about the addition you made to the property agreement. He believes there may be grounds to challenge its validity, given that it materially altered the document after it had been prepared by our attorney." Margaret smiled pleasantly. "Actually, Mr. Mitchell, your mother's handwritten clause is perfectly valid. She made the amendment before signing, not after. and the notary witnessed her signature on the document as it existed at that time, including the amendment. Basic contract law supports this. Daniel Hargrove shifted uncomfortably. While that may be technically correct, Ms. Winters, the spirit of the agreement, I interrupted quietly, was to transfer control of my home to my children without my full understanding or consent. I merely ensured that couldn't happen without my explicit approval. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice taking on that cajoling tone she used with her children when trying to persuade them to eat vegetables. Mom, we're worried about you. This house is too much for you to manage alone. What if you fall again? What if something happens and no one is here to help? Those are valid concerns, I acknowledged, which is why I've taken several concrete steps to address them. I gestured to my phone on the coffee table. Olivia helped me install a video doorbell and a medical alert system. I've arranged for Mr. Jimenez's lawn service to handle the yard work. I've set up automatic payments for all my utilities and subscriptions, and I've established regular check-ins with neighbors and friends. Nathan frowned. Olivia was here. When? Several times over the past week. I replied calmly. She's been extremely helpful. His jaw tightened at this evidence of what he would undoubtedly view as his daughter's betrayal. These are Band-Aid solutions, Mom. They don't address the fundamental issue. And what is that fundamental issue, Nathan? I asked, looking him directly in the eye. Is it truly concern for my welfare? Or is it control of an asset that has appreciated considerably since your father and I purchased it? Rebecca gasped. Mom, how can you even suggest? Because I overheard Nathan discussing the hundreds of thousands in potential equity that my stunt might cost you. I said evenly. Those aren't the words of a son concerned about his mother's welfare. Those are the words of someone viewing my home as a financial opportunity. Nathan's face flushed dark red. Who told you that? Was it Olivia? She had no right. She had every right. I countered. At least someone in this family believes I deserve to know when I'm being discussed as a problem rather than a person. Daniel Hargrove cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the personal turn the conversation had taken. Perhaps we could focus on finding a compromise that addresses everyone's concerns. Margaret nodded. That's why we're here. Eleanor has prepared a comprehensive proposal that, I believe, merits serious consideration. She removed a document from her briefcase and handed copies to each of them. This is Eleanor's proposed family care agreement. It acknowledges the legitimate concerns about her living alone while preserving her autonomy and dignity. Nathan glanced at the document skeptically. What exactly does this entail? I'll summarize, I said, sitting straighter. I will maintain full ownership and control of my home. I will implement all the safety measures we've already discussed, plus regular health checkups and a weekly visit from a home health aide if necessary in the future. I paused, making sure I had their full attention before continuing. In exchange, I agree to consult with both of you. Before making any major decisions regarding the property, I agree to annual assessments of my ability to live independently, conducted by a neutral third-party geriatric specialist. And I agree to revisit this arrangement if, and only if, that specialist determines I can no longer safely live alone. Rebecca skimmed the document, her expression softening slightly. This is more reasonable than I expected. Nathan remained stone-faced. It still leaves the house in limbo. What about our inheritance? What about planning for the future? Your inheritance? I repeated, unable to keep the edge from my voice. James and I worked for 40 years to build what we have. We saved. We invested. We made careful choices. At no point did we consider our assets to be your inheritance before we were even gone. That's not what I meant, Nathan backpedaled, though his expression suggested otherwise. My estate planning is addressed in a separate document, I continued. Margaret has helped me update my will and establish a living trust. You'll both be treated fairly, but I will not be pressured into surrendering control of my home or my finances while I'm still perfectly capable of managing them myself. Daniel Hargrove studied the agreement with professional interest. This is actually quite thorough. It addresses the safety concerns while preserving Mrs. Mitchell's independence. Legally speaking, it's a solid compromise. Nathan shot him a look of betrayal before turning back to me. And if we don't agree to this, Margaret answered before I could, then the current situation remains unchanged. Eleanor retains full ownership and control of her property, with the protection of the clause she added to your agreement. This proposal is being offered in good faith as a way forward that acknowledges everyone's legitimate concerns. Rebecca touched Nathan's arm. We should consider it, Nate. It's fair. He shrugged her off, standing abruptly. I need time to think about this. Of course, I said calmly. Take all the time you need. My door is always open for discussion, as long as that discussion treats me as a competent adult, rather than an obstacle to be managed. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca hesitated, then stepped toward me. Mom, I'm sorry if we made you feel disrespected. That wasn't our intention. Her apology seemed genuine, if incomplete. I took her hands in mine. Intentions matter, Rebecca, but so do actions. I raised you both to be better than this, she nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I know. We got caught up in, planning and worrying and forgetting to include me in decisions about my own life. I finished gently. Yes, she whispered. Nathan remained by the door, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. As Rebecca joined him, he finally spoke. We'll review your proposal and be in touch. After they left, Margaret gathered her papers, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. You did well, Eleanor. Very well indeed. Thank you for being here, I said, suddenly exhausted by the confrontation. I couldn't have faced them alone. Yes, you could have, she corrected me. But you shouldn't have had to. That's what allies are for. As I showed her out, she paused on the porch. James would be proud of you today. He always said you were the backbone of the family. The mention of my late husband brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I miss his counsel. He would have known how to handle this without fracturing the family. Margaret shook her head. You didn't fracture anything, Eleanor. You simply refused to be the one who broke. There's a world of difference. After she left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. Photos of happier times, books James and I had read together, the quilt my mother had made for our wedding. This house wasn't just valuable real estate. It was the physical embodiment of my history, my identity, my place in the world. I picked up a framed photo from the side table. Nathan and Rebecca as teenagers, laughing with their father on a camping trip. Where had those children gone? When had they transformed from the young people who sought my advice and valued my wisdom into adults who saw me as an inconvenience to be managed? Perhaps the seeds had been planted long ago, in small moments I had missed or dismissed. Nathan's growing obsession with financial security after the recession had wiped out a colleague's retirement. Rebecca's increasing anxiety about her own future after her husband's betrayal. Perhaps in their minds they were simply being practical, preparing for an inevitable decline they assumed I was too proud or too frightened to acknowledge. Understanding their motivations didn't excuse their actions, but it helped me see them with compassion rather than just hurt and anger. They were flawed, as all humans are, caught in the complicated web of love, fear, duty, and self-interest that defines so many family relationships. I opened my journal and wrote, "Today I stood my ground, not with anger or bitterness, but with clarity and resolve. I don't know if Nathan and Rebecca will ever truly understand what they attempted to do, or how deeply it wounded me. But I know this, I will not surrender my voice or my choices to anyone, not even those I love most in this world. That is my gift to myself, and perhaps ultimately to them as well. The example of a woman who refuses to disappear before her time. A week passed with no word from Nathan or Rebecca. The silence wasn't unexpected, but it weighed on me nonetheless. I kept busy, tending my garden,